Our guest today is Rory Kirk. After notable coaching spells in St Kevin's Football Club and Bohemian FC, Rory is now the current Women's Academy Manager for Shelbourne Football Club. Similar to a majority of head coaching roles in Ireland, Rory also works full-time as a secondary school teacher and holds a Masters in Education. We hope you enjoy.
Rory Kirk, the man of the moment.
How are you doing?
All is good, sir. To those that don't know our background, we've coached together. We went to college together. We've been friends for a while now. I don't know how long it's been. I'd say about 2016, I'd say.
Yeah, probably about
Looking back that long?
8 years or so.
Jesus
yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
Fucking ages. But even after the intro, it basically explains what your role is and stuff. So I think we can dive straight in with the intro question. So I think when it comes to your progression of starting as like a grassroots coach at Raheny, all the way through to, let's say, the top tier in the DSL Premier, to Bohemians in the National League, and now you are the Women's Academy Director or Academy Manager at Shelbourne. What is a day-to-day like now for an Academy Manager versus what you were as a coach?
Well, Jesus, yeah. Massive difference. And that's one thing, like at the start when I actually took on the role, I kind of expected it, but probably not to the extent that it's actually played out, you know. Like obviously I have a full-time job, and in another country, like my current role at Shells would be a full-time job, you know what I mean? So it's about trying to get a balance between the two. But obviously you're planning your sessions for an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, 45 minutes an hour, and going to do the session, reviewing it maybe, and then that's it, you know what I mean? Whereas there's always just something on your mind when you have a role like with that responsibility or whatever. It's like, is this okay? Is this okay? And then you're going to sessions, you're coming home from sessions, you're on the phone, you know, it's just non-stop really, like, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest difference, just how relentless it is. Like there's just constantly something to be doing, you know. So like day to day, like from my point of view now, back to school, back to work. So finish school at 3:45 and like straight to it, like planning, answering phone calls, going to sessions, then coming back on the phone again, like, you know. So yeah, that's my day to day, like pretty much every night of the week, you know, 5 nights a week at the moment, and then games Saturday, Sunday as well. So pretty much 7 days at it, yeah.
Yeah, that is 7 days. Yeah. Or as I say, 25/8.
Yeah, literally, yeah.
And Gary always goes out to me like that because he's saying like 24/7 is the extreme, but I think 25/8 is much better. Yeah. I think for football coaches and anybody involved in football here, I think it's like a step above, as you said, because the part-time versus full-time environments, it's absolutely crazy stuff.
Yeah, I think when you're coaching, it's like, it's always on your mind, of course. It's like, how can we, whether it's like the game that just happened that weekend or thinking about the game next weekend, how can we, like, you know, what can we do to improve? What can we do to improve this player? Is this player happy? You know, what can we do for this player? So it's always, you know, football based, whereas now it's like, right, what are our facilities like? You know, how can we improve that? What can we get the coaches that's going to improve their day-to-day job, like, or, you know, and so it's kind of gone away from like the football, like, to some extent, you know. Obviously that's still the main focus, but there's so much more that goes on to it. So I'd say just from that mindset of, you know, constantly just about football, you know, formations or, you know, our principles of play, you know, players, now it's more, no, not more, but, you know, it's very much both from that point of view, you know, the responsibility of everything that else goes on in the club, and then it's the sessions, then it's the training, then it's the games as well, you know. Where
does your role start and finish in the sense of the football aspect? So can you, let's say at the level as the academy manager, let's say you are not the governing body, but let's say the head of, is it from the 10s onward to the 19s?
Yeah. So,
and yeah, that's essentially the case, is it? And on that note then, do you organise, let's say, the overall philosophy of all those teams?
Yeah, so basically this year it'd be 11s to under 19s National League. So for example, like, I'd be out with different teams, you know, taking sessions with different teams. That's one really good thing about it, is that, like, you can dip in and out, take different sessions, different age groups. So like the weekend gone by on Sunday, for example, I was out in St. Anne's with the under 12s, taking that game, then straight to the AUL for the under 19s game, you know. So like, you're getting both sides of it, you know, you're dealing with different players with different needs. But that's one of the really good things about it as well, I suppose, is like that exposure to different, you know, how you deal with the under 12s isn't going to be the exact same as the under 19s, you know. And then from an overall philosophy point of view, it's quite different, like, you know, and it's probably something that it's taken quite a while for that to become the focus, you know. There's so much other stuff that goes on, you know, at football clubs, especially in Ireland, you know, where you're trying to do loads and loads of jobs, you know, and it can almost come away from the football sometimes, you know, and that can be frustrating at times. You know, you want to be, you know, helping coaches implement certain philosophies that you see. Whereas at the start, say the first few months, it was very much right, trying to get your feet on the ground, trying to get everything organized, and then it was like, all right, how can we go and watch sessions? Can we talk to managers about this or that? So yeah, like I think now the focus after like say 9 months or whatever I've been in the job, you're looking at it and you're thinking, right, how can I really try and affect this now from a football point of view? Once you have the house in order, almost, you know.
Mm-hmm. How much of your time is split between putting out fires and actually being on the pitch? Because like what I can see as like a leadership role, technically the hierarchy should defer the coaching to the coaches, whereas you should be essentially, this is my assumption now, essentially planning for 3 to 5 years down the line. Yeah. So how much are you caught in the present putting out fires, and how much are you actually planning for what the future of the club is?
Yeah, like, and I've had this conversation with people, like, you know, throughout since taking the role. It's very much you want to plan 5 years down the line, but it very much does become, all right, you know, this situation has happened. What do we do here? How can we fix this now? And then week to week, there's just always something, you know, there's something that happens or something that, you know, is on the back of your mind, right? I need to fix this. I need to do this. I need to make sure this is okay. And then, you know, it very much varies, like, on week to week. So if there's something like really that you need to really deal with right now, but planning down the line, that's where I want to really take the role as regards, right, this is what we can do long term, you know, this is the players we have now, these are the players we want in the future, like in those younger age groups. How can we get these players through playing the right style of football, you know, developing as individuals for the club at a later stage, for, you know, for the next person who comes in, you know, that it's in a good place. So yeah, putting out fires, I'd say, is a good way to describe it, like, because that's what it can become, you know, week to week. But yeah, I think it is my job to be able to affect it long term, you know, going down 3 or 5 years, you know.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the future of Irish football, the future of Shelbourne women's, for example, as like, let's say, like a stable piece club within the women's game, Ireland obviously recently qualified for their first World Cup ever. We scored our first goal, got our first point. In my opinion, and rightfully so, the celebration was based on qualifying. But how do you think the best strategy moving forward really is, off the top of your head, in the next 10 years to guarantee qualification for every World Cup? What is the next step there?
Well, yeah, like, I think it's probably been like fast tracked by the qualification of the girls this year. You know, I think not that it wasn't expected, but, you know, it's very much thrown it into the limelight from a lot of people who may not have had an interest, or, you know, people who may not know exactly the ins and outs of women's football. And like, for me myself, you know, only coming into the role, and like women's football, like, my sister played, so I'd have a bit of a knowledge of players, you know, who the best players are in the country, or like playing in England or whatever. But like, to answer the question, I think there's a lot to be done to guarantee qualification to those tournaments consistently going forward. Like, you see the level of the competition there, like even the smaller nations, or nations who may not have the history in women's football, how well they did at the World Cup, like loads of upsets. And the quality in general is just getting higher, and I think here we have a big job to do, you know, to make that consistently happen, and that comes from investment, really. Like, you know, like, mm-hmm. Like, ultimately a lot of football comes back to investment, and are people willing to invest in the women's game here to bring it on to that next level, you know? Yeah,
I would argue as well that I think this is something I don't think a lot of people think about. Like, that current Irish team in the women's, they were competing in the World Cup, obviously a crop of really good players, but to qualify for every World Cup consistently, you need better players. Yeah. You can't just have 1 or 2 players that are in the top 3 teams in England, for example. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to produce at least a squad of 16 who are top football players. And even if you look at Japan, for example, it was a relatively similar, let's say, structured approach, whereas teams weren't really expecting them to do well. But in terms of the consistency across the squad against or versus, let's say, the best players across the world, they were right at it. And my actually kind of like a circle back to our previous question was that if the academy directors are continuously putting out fires, how are the best brains like yourselves actually able to put the time into producing quality players? Like, what needs to fix at that stage? Is it simply just investing and allowing you to have a full-time role, or what are the steps that we could take in the next 18 months, for example?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, like, it's a good point you make. Like, you know, if you look at any of the men's teams who have qualified for major tournaments, you've got, like, say, 17 or 18 players playing in the Premier League, you know, and that's probably where it's fallen off in recent years. You know, there's championship players playing in trying to qualify for these tournaments where you're playing against nations with 10, 15, 20 players, you know, who are consistently playing in the Premier League, you know, and it eventually catches up with you. You know, you can have an Evan Ferguson every now and again, but you need 15 players, you know, who have a consistent level, constantly playing week in, week out at a high level in order to qualify for these tournaments. So, like, the women's game is no different, you know, and that's where obviously it needs to get to, where you have, say, 15 players playing in the Women's Super League in England, you know, and ultimately it's our job to try and to bring it on to a level where we can get those players as to a higher level as possible here. Ultimately the best players will continue to go to England, you know, and like for some people that's the best way to, like, if you look at Jessie Stapleton, for example, you know, she's gone over to West Ham now, a long-term deal, having played probably 150 games of, you know, competitive women's football. So if, like, that's a model that has to happen here, where we can offer young players, you know, a chance to play in the Women's National League over here. They can get experience under their belt playing with senior players, you know, exposure in Europe, for example. That's only going to benefit them to when hopefully they do move on, you know, to bigger and better things in the Women's Super League, you know, because we want a strong league here, but ultimately the best players will go there, and I don't think it's something that we should shy away from. Like, you know, they've got the infrastructure, they've got the facilities to be able to bring these players on to the next level. So if we're doing our job, those players should be in people's minds over in England, you know what I mean? So look, I think that is what we have to look at, that model of producing young players to play 100 games over here, and then by the time they're 18, 19, 20, they're going over there with a great background in football, like, you know, to really actually go and step in, play straight away. And if we do that with 10, 15 players, there's an unbelievable crop of players coming through in this country, like at various clubs, both inside Dublin, outside Dublin. And like, if we can get them to a level where they're playing consistently over here, eyes are on them, international football over here, then it's going to put them in a good position, you know. And if, who knows, 5-10 years down the line, those players will be playing in England, hopefully, you know, and playing consistently over there, and it's only going to benefit us as a national team, you know.
Yeah, and you raised two great points there. One of the big advantages that I see from the outside with the Women's National League is that young players get a better opportunity to play first team football compared to their English counterparts. So, for example, with Jessie, she might have 150 senior appearances. She might have a couple of first team Irish caps, has been capped all the way through, has played in the Champions League as well, which is a huge advantage to Irish clubs here. So why would a West Ham take a gamble on an academy graduate who's 18 with 0 senior appearances compared to bringing over Jessie on a long-term deal? Like, even on a business perspective, that risk-reward ratio definitely decreases with a player like Jessie. Do you feel like Ireland has an advantage there that we could double down on, allowing players to play senior football at an earlier age?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best things about the Women's National League over here is you see, like, there's players both at Shells and, you know, at Rovers, at loan, like, you know, Cork, for example, players playing at 16, even younger, 15, 16, 17, 18, like, playing consistently in the Women's National League. It's only going to benefit us, you know, it's only going to benefit them as individuals to get that exposure, to get that experience, you know. And look, the players who have gone before them have created that path for them, like, you know, and I think it's now at a stage where can we get these girls the exposure they need to really push on to the next level. And I think playing in the Women's National League is a great base for them. And as you say, it sends them over to England if that's the path they go on. It sends them over there with a lot of tools, to actually stay over there and play consistently. Like, it's very much, it's a different game, senior football. Like, over here, it's a different game. Over there, you'd imagine it's another step up again. So, like, it's only going to benefit players playing, say, as you said, 100, 150 times over here. Like, that's a valuable experience that academy graduates over there may not get, by the time they're 18 and 19. So definitely I think it's an advantage for us. Like, we can offer them at the moment. There's a reason we can offer it as well, though, is because we probably don't have the infrastructure to keep players like the top players over here, and there's, the level of players coming through now. You'd obviously like them to stay here, and like push on our league even more. But if that's the path we need to take at the moment, where players are good enough, then so be it. I think it's our job to just produce those players that up to a level where they can play here, and then if they can go even further, then even better. So
yeah, absolutely. Playing devil's advocate as well for young players in senior football, there is a debate whether players between the ages of 15 and 17 should be as exposed heavily to senior football, because as the typical debate would be that senior football is all about winning, whereas academy football is all about development. Do you feel that Ireland is currently bridging the gap well enough that 15-year-olds can continue to develop at a technical level, let's say, and as well transition into that competing phase of senior football?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that, like, obviously I've had to deal with as well, with young players, who are probably ready to play senior football from a technical point of view, and that's ultimately not the full package as being a technical footballer. Like,
no doubt.
You need the mental capacity to be able to deal with it. You need a tactical knowledge of the game to be able to play in certain systems and things like that. So look, it can be a tricky situation, but like each player is an individual. Some are ready, some are mentally ready to make that step, some are physically ready to make that step. So it's very much individualized. Like, and if we, for example, have a situation where there's a player who we think is good enough, but may not be mature enough, is probably the wrong word, but may not have the mental capacity to deal with that pressure, then it's just getting the balance right of, like, how much exposure can we give them? Like, is it like maybe training once a week with them? Is it, going in and being on the bench a couple of times, or, travel with the team away, to an away game? It's just about what's right for the individual player, like, and sometimes it can be fast tracked because of, out of necessity at certain clubs, like clubs aren't working off like massive squads. So if there is a case that a young player has to go in, then that's ultimately what has to happen, because we are obviously trying to produce players for the senior team. But I think it's very much an individual case by case basis. Some players are ready at a younger age. Some players may be technically ready at a younger age, but aren't quite ready, to step into that environment. But it's just, it is our job to try and, get them ready for it and give them as much information as we can, and help them in the transition from that academy football into senior football, So it may not be a perfect situation as well for some of them, and some of them may get fast tracked, just out of sheer like ability. Sometimes you just, it gets to a stage where you're like, right, she needs to be exposed to this. It's the same in the boys as well. Like, they can get to a level where you're thinking, right, they have to eventually play. So yeah, it's very much, what I'd say is very much individualized, and it's just about trying to get a balance between what's right for that individual at that certain time.
How do you manage expectations as an academy manager there? Because I'm trying to get into the mind of a 15-year-old who's going to look at their counterpart who's, let's say, broken into the first team and playing. But this individual might think that they have the same ability, but they're not getting those opportunities. Yeah. Like, all that player sees is that player is playing, I'm not. How do you manage those sorts of expectations? Because it absolutely is an individually based decision.
Yeah, no, it is 100%. And like, that is something that I've had those conversations with players, like, that it's so important, like, no matter what age you are, like, even not in football, like, if you're constantly looking at someone and saying, look, she's doing this or he's doing that, I should be doing that, you know what I mean? It's gonna like run you down eventually. Like, it's very much like, okay, what can I do better? Where am I at? What's right for me? Like, what's right for someone else may not be right for you, So I think everyone's timeline is their own. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a situation where you can have, like, you can be looking sideways. I think you need to be looking at yourself. Like, what little improvements can I make? You know, when is my time? You know, so as I said, I can't stand when people are, you know, compare themselves with other players, you know, because it's such an individualized thing, you know.
No doubt. And do you find that's the first, let's say, port of call for players when another player of their age group, let's say, for example, you've got a girl in the 17s National League team, she gets fast tracked in the first team. Is the natural instinct for young players to look and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? Or why am I not getting that opportunity? Or are players a little bit more self-aware now? It's always interesting to see how players are at that stage.
Like, there's so many factors to it, isn't there? Like,
Yeah.
like if you have, like, say, a 15-year-old playing in the senior team, or you have a 16 or 17-year-old playing in the senior team, there's obviously going to be comparison. You know, there's going to be like, all right, why is she there? Like, what am I doing wrong? And like, that may come from parents as well. You know, that may like play a factor. You know, like, she's doing this or she's doing that, you know, or like, she's doing this at that club, you know, like, should we go there? Or like, you know, things like that, you know. But I think it's very, very much an individual path, you know. So I don't like when players do that, but it naturally is going to happen. Like, it happens at all levels of football, all levels of in life in general. You know, people compare themselves or look around and say, what can I do better, you know. So from my point of view, it's about trying to manage that. Okay, like, this is where we think that this is your path, we think you're on, you know what I mean? This is what's right for you. It may not be straight away, but this is what you can do to be ready when your chance does come, you know what I mean? And that may be 2 months down the line, it may be 6 months, maybe a year, you know, maybe 2 years. But I think players will eventually, if they keep doing the right things, will find their level eventually, like, you know what I mean? And I think I've worked with players before as well who are, say, playing in the same team as 16-year-olds who are playing senior football or in an international squad. And it's not until 2-3 years down the line where you really see how good that player could be. Like, do you know what I mean? So if you said to that player 2 or 3 years ago, like, this would be your path, they may not see it at the time, but like, you may see it because you know their mentality, or you know, like, what makes them tick, you know, and you may see something that they don't, and it's just trying to convince them, right, this is the right path for you, like, this is the right timeline for you. And that may change over time, but ultimately I think players will find their path if they continue to do the right things, you know.
Big time. And let's talk about those players that actually have made that jump. I'm not saying that jump to senior football is for everybody. You know, a lot of people maybe at 15, 16 think, and that's all they know really, is, oh, I want to play first team football. Yeah. But as you grow older, you grow a little bit more self-awareness. You might actually come to the conclusion of, actually, football really isn't for me. Yeah. What is the typical player that makes the jump from academy football to senior football? What does that player look like? Now, I know every player is different, but there has to be some sort of shared, let's say, sauce between all players.
Yeah, like, it's funny, I had a similar conversation to that just the other day about, you have to really know what makes a player tick. Like, you know, what's the reason they're playing? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, do they love the game? Like, are they playing because they love the sport? Are they playing because their friends are playing? Are they playing because they just happen to be really good at it? Are they playing because their parents are, like, you know, pushing them to play? So I think that it's finding out what really makes a player tick, why they're playing. And I think something that is shared by players, you know, as you say, everyone's different, but like, something that, you know, you do pick up on is just a love for the game. Like, do you know what I mean? I think players tend to, you know, who love the game tend to stick with it, you know, and because they're playing for the right reasons, you know what I mean? They're not playing to please someone else, or they're not just playing, you know, socially. Like, eventually it gets to a stage where, like, you're like, right, is this what I want? And if you love the game, then that is, like, maybe the path that you go down. But obviously there's exceptions. Like, there's players probably playing in the National League who don't love football. Like, you know what I mean? Like, for example, like Paddy, like, wouldn't be mad into football, like, wouldn't be watching like matches all the time, but he's worked his way there to get there, like, you know, whereas like I like would be obsessed with it, like watching games all the time, but it didn't mean I was going to be a professional footballer, like, do you know what I mean? So it's there's constantly like exceptions to the rule, but absolutely. I do think you need to have like a certain love for it if you really want to stick it out, and like, you know, when times get tough like you sort of realize, is this for me, you know? And the players who do love the game tend to, you know, stick those tough times out, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like, even what is loving football? Because as you said there, that's two different people who are in the sport, living and breathing the industry. One might love playing, one might love the sport in general. Like, it's such an interesting conversation that I actually don't think that players are having with themselves at all. As you alluded to, like, some players are playing because family, they could be playing because of fear of not doing anything else with their time. I mean, the list is endless. Do you find like it is an empty void there with players individually?
I think, like, since I've got involved in the women's game, it's definitely something that, like, I've noticed that, like, or found myself, you know, trying to think about individuals, like, okay, like, why is she playing? Like, you know, like what makes her, you know, the player she is, or what brings her back here every, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever it is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is it that's gonna make, like, get the best out of her? Like, and with the women's game, it's quite different. Like, you know, it's very much like they're always great friends, you know. Whereas with the boys, like, they always tend to have a base love of the game, you know, like. Whereas in girls it can be slightly varying. Like, obviously there's like thousands of girls out there who want to be professional footballers as well, but I think there is other reasons why they play, and it can be a social point of view, you know, it can be a love of the game, it can be parents, you know, but ultimately it's really important that we do find, you know, what is it that's making this player come back all the time, you know what I mean? And then can we hone in on that, like, you know, and try and get the best out of that, like. Or if it is a case that a player just happens to be really, really good at football, so she just constantly keeps playing and she's got to a level where you're like, all right, now I have a decision to make. Is this something that I actually want to do, you know? So it's really interesting, like, and that is something that I think I've found since coming into the game is an importance on trying to get to know the player, like, what makes them tick, you know.
Yeah. And I think you touched on one of the questions that I really wanted to ask. You've been, and actually, to people that don't know, you have coached Evan Ferguson as well, and that Bohemian 17s team were absolutely brilliant as well. And it was a serious squad. And I think you've seen both sides of the coin now. Let's say high-performing underage players at both boys and also girls. What are the major differences between boys and girls in competitive top-level sport, if any? Yeah,
well, I think that is, like, what you said there. Like, there's not much, like, you know what I mean? There's not much difference, you know. Like, our under-17s and under-19s National League teams, like, watching those sessions, like, watching the intensity they play with and the competitiveness when it really gets going, you know, and, like, watching them before games and the build up to games, it's the same sport ultimately, like, you know what I mean? It's the exact same from that point of view. There's different intricacies and stuff, but ultimately high performance, like, you know what I mean? Like, those players are at a level because they're good players, because they do the right things, you know, because they challenge each other in training, like. And I think that is something that I was wondering, like, when I took the role, is like, you're right, like, what is the major difference, like. And ultimately when players get to a level now, like, at the younger ages it can be quite different, you know, but, like, when players get to that level where they're almost, you know, when they're fighting for international caps and stuff like that, there's not much difference as regards the mentality of it. Like, it's very much, you know, competitive environment, you know, intense environment, you know, at training, and that's what we want to create, like, because ultimately, like, why shouldn't the girls have the same mentality, you know what I mean? Why shouldn't they want to be competitive, you know? Ultimately they're fighting for the same things, like, whether that's international caps, you know, senior appearances, you know. So I think from that point of view there's not much difference, like, to answer your question, and that's what I love about it. Like, that's what I have loved about it, is getting to know those players and, you know, trying to create an environment. Like, when I arrived, the environment was brilliant in the 17s as well. Like, they were like amazing team, like, and just seeing that, like, you know, was really, like, you know, inspiring for me, you know, for taking the role and saying, like, right, there's no difference here, you know. And I think that's been really good for me, you know, and it's opened my mind a bit, like, to, okay, why shouldn't they have the same, you know, exposure, the same opportunities? Because ultimately they are trying to do the same things. They're as competitive as the boys, things like that, you know.
Did you have a stigma going in?
No, definitely not. Like, I think, like, I've, like, grown up, like, in a sports mad household, like, you know, where my sister played, you know, my brother plays, I played, like, you know, so it was very much, like, competitive environment. So, like, I understood that, you know, I saw my sister, like she played like at a decent level. She played for Shells as well, like, you know, at a younger age. But like, so from that point of view, I had exposure to it. I can see how people who haven't been exposed to it maybe have preconceptions about it, like, do you know what I mean? But I'd urge them to go and watch games or watch sessions, like, you know what I mean? And they'll soon see that it's very much the same, you know, they're fighting for the same things, you know? And like, just from that point of view, like training and things, I think the key thing is that, like, can we harness an environment that brings out that competitiveness in them? Like, you know what I mean? They may need a bit more of a push to get that competitiveness or that intensity out of them, but once you do, like, there's no stopping them then, you know?
Yeah. And at an academy manager level, what's the differences between resources that you can see currently between the men's game and the female game? Or sorry, I'll say the boys game and the girls game at underage level. Just speaking about resources specifically, is there differences in pitch allocation? Is there differences in kit? In differences in finance? Anything that you could shed some light on?
Like, yeah, like I think across the board, there's probably areas where like all clubs can do better at, like, you know, and there's obviously a focus on a lot of clubs have focused on their boys sections, you know, because the women's national league is relatively new for a lot of teams, like, you know, and you see like the likes of Pats, Waterford coming into it now, like, you know, who have really good environments, you know, which is great, like, and that will only, you know, bring everyone up with them, like, do you know what I mean? And
Hey everybody, sorry for disrupting the podcast. We get hundreds of questions a month about how to join our on-pitch training sessions. The easiest way to do it is to download the Training121 app. If you're on Android or on Apple, all you need to do is search Training121 and you'll be able to download and create your account from there. So even just picking up on, let's say, the Pats and the Waterfords, I definitely think even time, and I think time is definitely the healer for football, for life, for anything. And I think the big net positive is one thing that I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the FAR that brought it in, is that there's actually a requirement to have senior teams at both levels. Surely that's a net positive for the league.
yeah, like, absolutely. Like, you see, like, we, for example, have played twice in Oriel Park this year against Dundalk, who will have a senior team in the league soon. Pats, Waterford, senior teams coming into the league. Like, and that's only going to bring the standard in general up, like, you know, more competition, better facilities, like the use, for example, like Oriel Park. I know people say things about the pitch or whatever, but ultimately they're playing in the same place that the men's team play in, you know, like we're playing with our 17s, with our 19s, like it can only be a benefit to the league, like, you know what I mean? And it will bring the overall standard of it up, like, and as you said before, that I think it will, you know, it is catching up, like, and the more teams, the more players involved, you know, the more coaches getting involved, the more investment in it, it will only be a benefit for the league in general, you know.
And moving to you personally, because the amount of like depth in this conversation is absolutely crazy, because we talked about individual players, which that alone is its own job. Like even with James Claffion, for example, as a sports psych, like even like your role is a hybrid role, and you're also a full-time secondary school teacher. Do you have any practices of reducing the risk of burnout, for example? Because that's one thing that I could see potentially, even just like from knowing you as a person, that could absolutely be down the road in a few years.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. I think, like, from my point of view, like, I'm in a good place, you know. Like, I love my teaching job. I love my job now with Shells. Like, off the pitch, I'm in a good place, you know. So it's about trying to find a balance. Like, and, you know, I know 7 days a week doesn't sound like there's much of a balance to it, but like, ultimately I do make time. Like, football is what I love, like, do you know what I mean? And like, even if that's going to Talca Park or to Dalymount on a Friday night, like, you know, and just watching a game with, you know, not having to think about certain things, you know, like, that's a relief for me. Like, I'm still at football, but, you know, that's like my time where I can just be like, right, you know, let me just enjoy this game, you know, for the hour and a half that it's on, and, you know, I can sit back and watch it, like, or even like simple things like, you know, going for coffee, like on my own, like in the morning, or, you know, like before a game, stuff like that, you know, just time to decompress, you know, think, listen to a podcast or whatever, you know, that's probably like my time where I can like switch off, you know, and just reflect on everything, you know. And but yeah, I think like burnout is definitely something that in the first few months of the role, like I was definitely like experiencing like, you know, because it's really full on, you know, you're constantly on the phone. Like sometimes you're not off the phone till, you know, at 11:30 at night, you know, you've gone to sessions, you've been at school all day. It can be a lot, but luckily I'm in a job with teaching where we get good holidays, you know, there's a lot of time, like we're finished 3:45, like, so, you know, it's not like I'm running one place to another. I have time during the summer, during holidays to, you know, really reflect on what I'm doing. And I think that's an important thing to have, you know, because definitely I had experience over the years, like, you know, because, you know, when you know yourself, like when you're in it, you know, you're in it, and it's like it's all consuming. So I think it is important to find those moments where you can just reflect, or, you know, just switch off and not think about it at all. Like, you know, it's very difficult to do, but
big time. I only had that conversation today, and basically, like, I think depending on what week it is, I'm definitely like in a phase of, let's say, potential burnout, just purely because of the commitment to, let's say, a full-time role, the commitment to training 1-to-1 and the hours. It's like, I think people don't really realize that coaching is very physically demanding, but it's also very mentally demanding. Yeah. And the space that an individual needs alone is actually very important. And I find even like some of the earlier, and this is to any message that anybody's working, let's say, full-time or in coaching, one of the big things that I found is that I get a lot of, let's say, brain fog or lack of clarity, especially when I'm doing a lot of repetitive things. Because coaching is quite, although it's quite nuanced and every day is different, the principle of it is quite repetitive, if that makes sense. And I find even with the more repetitive tasks, there's definitely a bit of like brain fog. I say that's probably the best way to say it. Like lack of clarity. Do you think if you were away from a secondary school role without, let's say, prolonged breaks, that would really creep up on you quickly?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think, like, if I would say, for example, was doing, like, you know, an 8 till 5 and then going straight to training, and, you know, like with the teaching, it's very much like once you're in the classroom, like you're switched off from it completely. Like, you know, it's not like an office job where, like, you know, you can be on your phone, like half on your phone, or, you know, like on the laptop and stuff. You know, when you're in the classroom with like 30 lads looking back at you, like you have to be present, like, you know what I mean? So that definitely does get your mind off it, like, and you know, I think that's kind of been a blessing as well, like, you know, because it does have some, it does refocus you, you know, or get your focus on something else as well, you know. So I think it's a job that definitely has its benefits and works alongside football quite well, you know, especially over here training in the evenings and stuff, you know, it works quite well. But look, I think sometimes you can get into a system where it's like your weeks go into your weeks, you know. It just becomes like, you know, sort of, it's just prolonged time, you know, like where you're not really getting, you feel like you're not getting much done because, you know, it's kind of like next day, you know. So I think it's important that you can find certain times that you can sit and reflect and think, okay, this is what I've done, this is what I need to do, you know, and like sometimes just say, okay, yeah, like maybe things aren't as bad as you think they are, like, you know, you know, things aren't as stressful as you think they are, you know. And when you have moments like that, it allows you to go into tasks with more of a clear mind then, you know.
Yeah, and I always thought, and even just knowing you for 8 years, I definitely think, like, regardless of football, I think definitely educating is, let's say, a core value, or like, and then I would call it specific knowledge. I think it's something that you have learned that nobody could teach you, the ability to actually intake or input information and then output it correctly and communicate it to, let's say, an under 19 player playing for Ireland, or an 11-year-old kid who's just at a social level. Do you find that there is a lot of overlap between teaching and coaching? And do you think, especially in Ireland, that teaching, if coaching genuinely is your passion, is a really good career path to marry both together?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a massive overlap, like, just like as regards how to deal with individuals, you know what I mean? Like, you're constantly, you know, talking to people in school, talking to people at training, like, you know, people around the same age, like, and you're thinking, right, how can I get the best out of this individual? Like, you know, whether it's like trying to get some 15-year-old to be interested in rocks, you know, in geography class, or like whether it's trying to like teach them to I don't know, like Cruyff turn, whatever it is, like, you know what I mean? It's you know, you're still trying to communicate in a way that suits them as an individual. Like, so I think yeah, the topics are obviously definitely varied, but the principles of it are very much overlapped, you know. And I think it's something that works really well, you know. And like even having like I've had students like who have been on the team that I've coached like away from training, like, you know, like Billy Gilmore, for example. I taught him in school for years. Like I was also coaching him at the time. He's captain of the team that I was coaching. So like there's definitely an overlap there as well at times, you know.
What a player too, by the way.
Yeah, baller.
Sicko. When it comes to, let's say, being a teacher, I find great teachers are great learners. Who has been your major influences, let's say, even on a football perspective or even on an education perspective?
There's been loads. Like you pick up little bits from everywhere, don't you? Like I think, like from a football point of view, there's been so many people that I've like taught, like who've influenced me in the right way, and like other people who I've looked at and have said, all right, maybe I don't like that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
or like there's bits of people that you like, there's little things you take, there's other bits that you don't like, and you know, I think there's certain things that you can pick up that you're like, yeah, that really suits the way I do things, you know. And like that goes for teaching as well. But like from a football point of view, like I've had like loads of influences, like even like yourselves, like from like, you know, friends, like, you know, just having discussions about football, about things, like bouncing things off each other. Like you may have a point on something, I may have a point on something, and, you know, sort of iron it out. Like, but like to go like answer your question, like Carl Lamb, for example, like who you had on before, was a massive influence on me as a coach. Like, and you know, he was one of the reasons I got involved with Kevin's, and or the main reason I got involved with Kevin's. And like he's just given me like just constant like little like nuggets over the years that you've been like, yeah, that was really, really good, like, you know.
Yeah.
And like there's other people like Caffo and Kevin's, you know, as well, and Derek Pender at Bowes like was a huge influence on me as a coach, like, and just like even in this role now, like I sort of refer back to my time with Detter and think, you know, like I've taken little bits from him like that I think suit my personality, because ultimately like you have very different personalities from certain people, but there's still little bits you can take from them, you know, and apply to what you do, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And from, let's say, the elite coaching perspective, how big of an influence would be Marcelo Bielsa as a Leeds fan be compared to, let's say, the Irish coach that you know personally?
Yeah, like I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, like Bielsa at Leeds was just like a dream, like a football dream coming true, like, you know, and like just the way it went, like how perfect it was kind of like ridiculous, you know. It couldn't have gone any better. And like from my point of view, like absolutely like Leeds mad, like growing up and like seeing some very dark times like at the bottom of League One, and like to seeing that, like, you know, like taking on top Premier League teams, like going to City and winning with 10 men, you know, taking on Liverpool. I remember that Liverpool game, first game of the season when we got promoted. I think it was like 4-3 or something.
Crazy
and, like,
game.
just went toe to toe with them, like no backward steps taken, you know, and just having like the conviction, like, and, you know, of your principles, and like this is the way we're going to do it. We're not going to change for anyone. It was probably his downfall in the end at Leeds, but like I think live by the sword, die by the sword, you know. But like
Yes.
you have to appreciate that as well, you know.
Yeah, character and that idea of authenticity, I think, is very important. There's not a lot of authenticity in football, I find.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. It's a great point. I think like I think someone said it on your podcast before. It's like what people say, like what holds you up and like in a high esteem for, is the same thing that they'll take you down for eventually. Like, do you know what I mean? And like to use Bielsa as an example, like you have pundits everywhere, like, you know, lauding over the stuff Leeds are doing, and then by the end, I remember like the last couple of games, I think we played Spurs at home, like, and we were man marking and just getting torn apart, and like they're saying like, how can this go on? Like he needs to change. Whereas before they were like, he's unbelievable, like he sticks to his convictions, you know. So it's very fickle as a game, like, you know. But I think like people like that, you know, and like I'm not going to say like I've been massively influenced by Bielsa from a tactical point of view or anything, but just like seeing someone like, you know, so like convinced this is the way to do it, this is my way, like this is the way we're going to keep doing it until eventually it will go wrong, like, you know, that's like is to be admired, you know, in any walk of life, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. And on the lead side, is that something that you just grew up with from the family interest? Because Carl, for example, adopted Barcelona through, let's say, a random event where he watched the Champions League, for example. But is that something that's just family ingrained with Leeds?
Yeah, like my dad, like just was a Leeds fanatic growing up, like from obviously from the great teams in the 70s. And like it's just something he passed on to me, like, you know, and like from like as long as I can remember, I've just been Leeds mad, you know. And I was just old enough to remember us in the Champions League, you know, semi-finals against Valencia and things like that. But like after that, it went downhill fairly quickly after that. But like you don't like love it any less, you know. Like even in those times, like I still used to go over with my dad a good bit, like to go to watch those games. But yeah, it just Leeds mad. Like I'd say like now is probably like at the stage I'm at now, I'm like probably not falling out of love with it, but it's definitely a different type of like love than I used to have, you know, when I was younger, and it was more authentic, I'd say, you know, than it is now. I think it's more of a entertainment now for me, like, do you know what I mean? If I'm watching like Premier League football, I wouldn't be like, you know, I just think like a lot of the discourse around it is like, you know, it's just a bit tiresome, and there's so much like content pushed on you about it. I think it's got to a stage now where I'm kind of like, I dip in and out of it, you know. I'd watch a Premier League game if it was on, but I wouldn't be, you know, fanatical about football in England now. Like I say to people, like I'd go to Tolka or Dalymount over watching a game at home like every day of the week now, you know. So I think it's definitely changed over the years, like, and the game's changed over the years, you know, like with everything that goes on in and around the game, especially in England. So I think for all our faults over here, it's definitely still an authentic experience like that you get in Ireland that you just don't get anywhere else, you know, or like, well, anywhere else in England especially, you know.
Yeah, very well said, man. And I do agree. I think on a fan perspective, especially for people who are 25-8 in football like you, football starts as a romantic love, then it becomes, let's say, a practical love type of thing. It definitely transitions, whereas I think fans don't really understand the nuances of actually being involved in football.
Yeah.
That's quite romanticized. And on the, let's say, the English perspective, I 100% agree with you. Content is being pushed to a new level. Yeah. Do you think that fans are overwhelmed with football and are getting disillusioned with the idea of what football is at the core?
Oh, completely. I think it's just gone away from like what it actually is. You know, it's like a soap opera now. Like, you know, you see how many followers, you know, people like, what's your man's name that does the transfers?
Fabrizio.
Yeah, like for example, like he's like one of the most famous people among like, I'd say 10 to 15, 16-year-olds. Like, you know what I mean?
Doubt.
Like they're quoting him all the time. It's like what's going on? Like if that's like the be all and end all of football, like it's kind of like, right, do I really want, like, is this really what it's all about now, you know? I think it's definitely come away from football at its core, you know. And that's like, I love the League of Ireland. Like I love going to games. Like I'd go to a game every Friday if I could, like, you know. And I think it's definitely gone away from its core. But I think here we're lucky enough that it's still at a level where, look, as I said, for all its faults, it definitely still has that authentic feel when you go to a game on a Friday night. Like, do you know what I mean? And like seeing the young lads now, like that I teach in school, they like huge amounts of them be going to games, whether it's Shells, Pats, like even a couple of Rovers fans.
You're on the Vincent side.
But I know Northside Rovers fans. You ever heard the likes? But yeah, like as I said, it has gone away, but it's great to see those lads who go right down with their mates on a game on Friday. I see them, like, they're like, all right, sir, like, you know, on a Friday in Dalymount, they're talking, like, and like I love that. I love chatting to them about the games, like on a Monday morning, like, and yeah, it just feels a bit more authentic, you know, that it's like, right, this is about the football and nothing else around the game, like, you know.
Yeah.
And I do think that yes, it can be a lot better. Like the facilities can be a lot better. I know we're giving out about the content in England, but like the content and the way the league is advertised and marketed can be better over here as well. But I do think you can do that as well as still having that love and that, like, you know, authenticity about the game here, you know?
Yeah, no doubt. And as a full circle back, what is football at the core to you globally and even to you individually? What do you think football is?
To me, like, it's it's like everything, you know, like it's my full life basically since I can remember, you know. I've always just been fanatical about it, whether it's playing, watching, coaching, you know. I've just always just been like, you know, fascinated by it, like loved it. And for me, it's like now, it's like, as I said, it's work, but it's also an escape. Like, do you know what I mean? Like I work in it, and I'm lucky enough that I can work in it as well as teaching. But it's also like, if I was going to get like have an escape, it would be like, you know, watching a game like on my own, like on a Saturday, or going to a game on a Friday night. Like, do you know what I mean? That would be like my ideal like escape. So like, it's pretty much, you know, everything, you know.
Yeah. And the authenticity side of football at the core, I think a good word for football, if you were to describe it, what is, let's say, English football moving away from, I think the key word would be community.
Yeah.
Would you agree or disagree with that?
Definitely, yeah. I think like football is for the fans. Like, do you know what I mean? Football is for the people who love the sport for the right reasons, you know. And I think that is something that is like deeply flawed in the English game now, like especially at the top end of it, and like further afield as well. Like, you see everything that goes on now. Yeah, it is ultimately a community game, like where people go and support their local teams. That's what it was based on when it first started, like, you know, and that's why I love it, you know what I mean? Like, you can go down, you can see the same people that you see every Friday, or you can see the same, you know, faces around. You can go with your mates, chat about the game. That is ultimately what, you know, like, even in Ireland, it's great. Like, you know, you talk about community, like, you see players around the place, like, do you know what I mean? Like, they'll chat to you, you know. It's just very much, you know, at that level, you know. And I think that's why so many people are coming back to the game now, and you see crowds growing everywhere, is because people are sort of realising, okay, this is a product we can get behind, you know, that's on our doorstep, that's local to us. And, you know, like, as I said, for all its flaws, but there's good quality in it, you know. It's a good level, you know. And like, even when I was younger, and as I was saying, I was like so fanatical about Leeds and, you know, the Premier League and things like that, I probably would have brushed aside like the League of Ireland, or wouldn't have really been a massive thought. Like, my dad would have brought me to games. He was always a Bows fan as well, like, so I would have gone to games with him, but never really would have been in my consciousness, like, you know what I mean? But like, as I've grown up, like, and it's just become, you know, at the forefront of most of my life now, like, you know. And yeah, I wouldn't change. Like, obviously there's lots I'd change about the Irish game here, but there's a lot I wouldn't, and that community base is a lot of it, you know, that I wouldn't change.
Yeah, and I think even just a final question to wrap up on the Irish football perspective. I said the same thing to Carl on the last question. You know, big questions have big answers, quite generic, because that typically is what it is.
Yeah.
At the ground level for you at Shelbourne as academy manager, what impact do you want to make in the next 12 months that's going to increase the quality of players?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's like the amazing thing about the women's game here is the people involved in it. And like, for very little back, like, in of years ago, like past years, like very little exposure, the amount they put into it is just amazing. Like, do you know what I mean? I think it's like our duty as the people, like, you know, like at Shells, like, or like further afield at other clubs at the FAI, to give them what they need, like, you know, the resources that will help them continue to do the great work that they do, you know. And like, from my point of view, it's just about trying to harness the talent that we have, like, give them the best environment that we can possibly give them. It will never be perfect, or for the moment it won't be absolutely perfect. Like, you look across like the water, and like, we were away recently with our under-19s, and like the facilities, like we were in Birmingham, the facilities are like unbelievable, and you're hoping you can get it to a level where you're competing with that. But like, from 12 months point of view, it's just about trying to get little wins, like, you know, do what you can to create an environment where players want to come back to it all the time. They look forward to coming into it. We're improving them as players, and that's from like under 11s up to under 19s and into the senior team. Like, you know, it's so much about the environment, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, perfect, you know. Like, obviously you strive to get it as good as you can, but I think the people involved are at the core of it, like, do you know what I mean, and trying to help them, you know, facilitate like good sessions, you know, where players are developing, individuals are developing, and yeah, like that's the bones of it, is trying to help the people who are helping the players, you know, that is ultimately my job, like, and any academy manager will be the same, you know. So there's lots we can improve on, but there's lots like clubs are doing at the moment that's unbelievable on very little resources, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, if there's any players that would be interested in joining Shells, what's the best way to get in contact with yourself or with the club in general?
Well, like any of the social media pages, like the Shells Academy social media pages, like they'll find all the info they need there. They can DM those pages, and someone will get back to them. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks a million, Rory. Appreciate your time.
No problem at all. It was a pleasure.